Goodness. Hi, and welcome to Spiritual Alchemy Energy, the podcast with Julie. Tonight, I have a very special guest, my friend and co host of What the Bleep is Spirituality and da 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 da. He is the Shamanic Happiness Coach, Matthew Embrey. Thank you for being here tonight.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm excited. I'm excited to get into topics and talk about stuff. We always go good places. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring up, we have had so many conversations over the last year and a half. And we recently had a little conversation after one of the many What the Bleep webinar series here. And we were talking about gifts, not spiritual gifts, but gifts or lessons or wisdom that when we work on somebody or work with a client. And I shared with you that I think I did this from the beginning. Tried to find the gift, tried to find that lesson, tried to find some sort of wisdom that I was blessed with working with a client. And clients are unaware of this. I mean, if you're aware and you're working with people in the capacity that we do, have you found those gifts and those lessons lately?
Well, that's a really good question. And it's always good to have those questions be asked, because a lot of times as facilitators and all those things, we rarely get to do a self-inventory of that. So thank you. Yes. I really love when I'm facilitating, a lot of times I'm somebody who helps ground energy away, or it just seems to what happens. It's not my choice, so to speak. But it doesn't actually like go into me. It just goes right through me like a straw kind of a thing. And because we're a physical being that's basically like transforming this non-physical thing through another avenue, in order for the physicality to let it go, we have to like do certain things. So movement, or we have to alchemize it basically into something else. And so oftentimes during sessions, I'll be like yawning or burping or like things like this. And so I think it's hilarious. And I always try to prompt the client that this is what's probably going to happen. If you're going to release stuff, I'm going to be yawning and doing things. And it's beautiful because like when they're on the table, they're going through their things. They're going through their past stories, their wounds, their healing, their joys, whatever it might be. And directly as they're like shifting, you can see it, in their eyes or their breath or whatever it is. And I'm just going like, oh, their breath is picking up. Here we go.
Right. You're making me yawn right now. I'm like, right?
Yeah. So it's nice to be able to talk with a client and decompress after those sessions, because oftentimes the facilitation of the release is kind of like an icebreaker at the end. Is like most of the time, if I don't say anything, they're like, gosh, you were really tired or something. And I'm like, oh no, I wasn't tired at all. It was just that you were going through so many things that I'm helping to facilitate the release of these, and whatnot. And that conversation always leads you to what they went through, or like you're saying, what is the wisdom in what's being created, and what the stories are, what we're learning, what the gift is that's coming to us. And so for me, I love that when I have those yawns, when I have those releases, I realize that I'm processing things, and there's wisdom in that. So for me, it triggers immediately to be asking those questions to the client of, okay, what did you go through? What were you elevating in yourself that can elevate? What were you elevating from the one frequency into a higher frequency? So being able to talk about like the gift of just being able to have a release of alchemy, of transformation, oftentimes starts the conversation in the space of, what gift are you going through right now or receiving in this wisdom? And I would say the number one gift that I witness from people is acceptance. A lot of people, when they're healing, they have a hard time moving away from that old pattern of things, or that old viewpoint, that old interaction in life, and whatever that might be. And it could be in the form of like anger. And so that's unresolved anger, right? Or it could be in the form of stagnation. And so that maybe that's unresolved grief or something of that nature. And so when we get to those spots where they're just like, wow, I moved through something, and we get to talk about that gift, right? And so what kind of gifts what kind of gifts does witnessing or holding grief do for you, right? And a lot of times we all have this experience where we actually have a good breakdown of a release, and how we feel after that is what I'm talking about, that perceptual shift. And we feel, oh, I'm different now. And right. And that's the gift that comes to us oftentimes. It can come in many forms, but that's just one that we get to witness often. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been a witness to that quite a bit. And you don't even, I mean, we work remotely, and you don't, I don't know if you know when you've like moved something, and they have an emotional release. Because I don't work on the phone or on the internet when I'm doing my Reiki and that energy work. Um, so you kind of already know they're having an emotional release on their end, and what's going on with them, and having to call them and go, hey, are you okay? And then knowing like the next day, hey, you got an emotional hangover because of this work we did, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up, because sometimes people will have that I'll just call it a misconception, that doing work in person versus remotely, there's like a difference or a benefit to one or the other, right? And technically it's an ego preference. It's a 3D preference. There's nothing more than that, because in both avenues, the work actually gets done. The only time it doesn't is when our ego self-sabotages it and says, oh, because I went through this and it was this way and it didn't come to me on the silver platter that my ego wanted it, will rewound. So if somebody didn't appreciate, a distance healing or something, then they'll be calling you back and being like, what's going on? I thought this worked, right? So it's a really good conversation to have, to let people know, like, no, these things work. It doesn't matter if you're in person or not. You just have to be willing, right? Like, and one of the things I like to say is, that I ask clients is, how coachable are we? How much are we willing to shift? How much are we willing to accept a new thing? And it gets beautiful when people have that conversation with themselves of like, oh, okay, maybe I can be receptive. And then when we're in a session, just like you're saying, we do have to do those little like callbacks, those check-ins for the emotional hangovers. But it's kind of cool that you get to do that much more on an intuition basis. When I'm in there, and I'm yawning or something, generally a release or something will happen. However, I do a lot of work to ensure that I don't allow the client to experience like a really dark place unless they really have to go there. So a lot of my container is set up to where it's kind, easy, gentle, good. So the rough stuff comes after they've left my container, and then they choose to do that kind of thing. Like they choose it in very rough ways. And then that's when I have to call and be like, hey, so how was your last 3 days? And they're like, our session was great. And then 2 days later, I had a shit show thing happen. And I'm like, oh, okay, you forgot about the kind, easy, gentle, good part. That's okay. You were meant to go through it. Let's talk about it, And then we do that. So anyway, I love it. It was a good conversation. Good stuff coming up. So, okay, The question that's on the screen now, I love this. Do you need to push light into the places that are opened up so that the old habit doesn't move back in? I love this question, and it is very multifaceted. So this says, when we exercise for the first time in a while afterwards, our muscles will be sore. If the first, I wonder if this is what we feel after releasing. It's a good analogy. It's. I think that when we release, it's a personal experience to everybody, and so some people might have it like where they're a towel that's been wrung out, right? And so when you have a towel that's really wrung out, it doesn't go back into shape so easily. It has to like reform slowly and kind of like recrawl back out from its shell, or like out of its cocoon or whatever. And so yes, that's a good analogy for that. And releases sometimes go completely unnoticed, depending on the work you do to course correct what habits you were just talking about. I call it the education around not rewounding, and generally that's most of what I actually engage with clients about is not rewounding, because removing the things are really actually easy. Once we get into that and we're like, oh, that's what the issue is. But we're so habituated to the old way that we were and that we were thinking that the tools that we need to not rewound are what really is the juice of any coaching session, of any other session that you do. That's the stuff that really is going to create the biggest foundation for change. And so that kind of coaching stuff might look like, an example might be if we're working with somebody who is very, I'm delivering this wrong, is really judgmental, but it's an egoic judgmentalism. So it's not like I'm not judging people out, not people or things, but in general, their mind is geared toward judging things. So that might be judging the quality of their work, of how they show up, of their dress, of a whole bunch of things. And so we see this a lot in very perfectionistic people. So if we're going to release something from somebody who's really in that perfectionism state, because oftentimes that causes a lot of anxiety. It's just really bad. If we're going to release that, then yes, we can release why we're doing it, and also understand that the story that created it is now habituated and it's still in our tissues, right? So our neurology is geared toward doing the thing. We don't believe it anymore, but we're wired to do the thing. And so now we need to unwire it. And that means getting into that emotional, mental, and physical connection of understanding that, like, when you have this craving, this is what it means, right? And so you can start course correcting when you feel the craving come through, or whatever that might be. And an example for the perfectionism thing might be that the next time somebody feels anxiety coming through around a perfectionist thing is to practice doing an 80% or a 70% rule. So a lot of times people who are perfectionistic in this avenue, in one or more avenues, their level 100 is other people's like level 150, right? Because it's just they're geared to doing the task very well, and their mind has been created and their neurology is created to do the thing, so they're really good at it. And it doesn't take as much effort as another person. So what I recommend for people when they're not trying to rewound, if this is like a perfectionistic thing, is to only go to 80% of your ability and then be okay with it and sit with that discomfort. Because one of the things that many people, many gurus and everybody will say is that comfort and growth are not in the same avenue. And so you really got to sit in your discomfort, or you got to like literally just move zip codes and be like, okay, things are different, and you got to be okay with that.
Yeah, it's a process. It's not just, I mean, yes, you can push light into those spaces. I mean, we're pushing energy into that space to move out the negative and bring up that awareness to the client. And if it hasn't already surfaced, the patterns of behavior,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that actually, I love the way you just described that, bringing back into this, bringing light into things. I got really on one tangent. I apologize for that. In the space of like pushing light into things, you could translate that to where, if you're a Reiki practitioner, or if you use energy, or if you just want to pray, it's kind of a similar avenue. You're still pushing light into things. The physical manifestation or the act or the observation that you might see, but pushing light into those would be the next time that the perfectionist witnesses that the job isn't done good enough. Instead of falling into catastrophe, they instead are able to pause and go, wait a minute. Oh, I can do something, instead of going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And so that's what putting light into it would be, is it's a buff. It's like an airbag, right? Instead of just diving off the cliff, you're like, oh wait, I got my parachute. I'm going to land this crazy train, and it's going to be okay. So, I mean, hopefully the landing is okay.
I love it. Okay. So I've had quite a few guests on my podcast recently, and I know you brought this up before, doing psychic surgery. Maybe you call it something different. I've been really experimenting with going deeper in, like, because there's places I feel now after doing this Reiki can go to, but
I love that.
Sometimes you got to go deeper. Now it's like, I'm scraping the bone, my skeletal system, going into the tissue, pulling out different things. And it's like, when you do Reiki, I don't know, you can see the energy. So now I'm seeing different kinds of things coming out. So maybe speak on that wherever you want to go with that and psychic surgeries.
Sure. Okay. That's a really good topic, because I love it. One of my most favorite things to talk about in energy work or in coaching and working with clients is ethics. And so it's beautiful to talk about psychic surgery in understanding the ethical implementation of this, because one of the things as being a quantum being that's experiencing a body is that we have the ability to modify our reality. We've already been shown this. You can Google search that all you want to. There's things that apparently go missing from reality, but there's records of it. Like, people have memory, but there's no actual physical evidence of it. So it's interesting that we literally do change our reality. But in the context of bringing that up, it means that where awareness goes, energy flows, right? And so if we're going to do psychic surgery, we want to know that we're in a container that is going to be most beneficial, and that the effects or the aftermath of it is going to be understood or held in an appropriate container. So doing psychic surgery is going to be, it's going to be a personal experience. How should I say this? The way that one goes about it will be personal or unique to each individual to some degree, because I don't have your exact perceptual capabilities, and nor do you. We don't have these exact same things. Otherwise, we'd be the same person, right? We'd be complete quantum beings, and that'd be a different scenario. We'd be having a very different podcast. But
we would be bored.
Yeah, right. We're like, oh, what were you going to talk about? Oh no, everything that we already talked about. We're great. So in that space of going in and doing these surgery things, what I say is how one goes about that is going to look different. And so when I use Reiki, Reiki kind of talks through me, or gives me messages, and I'm also communicating with the client's higher self. And so before any session, I always ask the person to tune into their higher self. Even if they don't understand what this means, the words get in there. Tune into your higher self, and please go ahead and ask permission for this healing, this session, whatever it is, to take place for our greatest and highest good, held in the safe container that we have created together. When you get this yes, please go ahead and verbally say that or give me a nod. And and we talk about this, if you get a no, it's okay. It means we're supposed to reschedule, or it's not supposed to happen, or whatever, right? But I always wait for that. And so once I have that, that means that, okay, cool, we're in the receptive state. So now when we're starting to move things around, it's not going to be as jarring for the client, as opposed to if we were to do this without containers and things like that. Because yes, there's a whole bunch of free will stuff, and also when we decide to interact together, and if we verbally say yes in the physical realm, that's also an agreement in some regards on the non-physical. And so we may not understand exactly how deep we're going into this, so or the ramifications of it. Yeah, all parties do have to participate. And that can look like a lot of ways. So that might look like all parties participating could look like an argument at a grocery store, right? And it's very out of context from clients and coach together, but they chose to participate in that argument, and they chose to align in that one spot at the same time, right? And so it's crazy. There's this idea of participation is is a good conversation to have, because it does bring open, what are we doing? What are we intending to have happen? And so a lot of times when we do psychic surgery stuff, the biggest thing to do is to work with your own trust, your own level of trust and your own level of intuition. So the more trust you have and the more understanding of your intuition you have, the better you understand what scalpel quote to pick up, or paintbrush to pick up, right? Because there's, do you need a teeny paintbrush? You need a big old one. And so the more you understand your intuition and you can trust, the more when those messages from the other higher self come to you, the easier it is for them to be heard. And so in that context, you can then go in and go, okay, what is being asked for this situation or for whatever I'm witnessing? And so this also could mean that psychic surgery can look like a lot of different things. For me, when I'm doing psychic surgeries on somebody, generally it would mean the removal of like energetic technologies or cords or entities or anything like that, which is myriads, and everybody has them. So, don't feel like anybody watching, I guarantee you, if you're alive, you have something connected to you. And it's beautiful. Yeah, right? We're a human. We're supposed to. We're in the body. So when I go into that space, I actually see like a 3D blueprint of a person, of their personage, and it also connects into like their Akashic a little bit. And so as I'm interacting, I'm witnessing kind of like DNA spirals, or I'm witnessing the energetics of like a technology or whatever. And so if I'm removing a technology, it would be like, well, what's required of this? And so I might, in my mind's eye, manifest a screwdriver or whatever it might be, right? And so this is where, the perceptual ability that each person has going into psychic surgery is going to be completely different. And so trusting in your intuition, and understanding, again, the ramifications of what you're doing. When we go in and we start shifting past life things, or we shift stories, or when we want, if we're going into something and we just want relief, and we're like, just get it out of me, get it gone, whatever. Oftentimes that's our ego panicking, and we are not realizing what's going to come next. And so if that's really what we want, and we're like, get it out of us right now, kind of a thing, that kind of stuff can happen. And what it might look like is like crashing a car the next day, losing a job. It might look, it could look like really crazy things. And so that's why the ramifications of doing psychic surgery are very important. And which brings us into, again, the previous question, homework, right? How to not rewound, all those things. So I love that was very cyclical.
Wow. Well, now that you put in like psychic surgery into the context of removing cords and whatnot, I guess I have done this on other people to a degree. It's been more with myself because I don't feel comfortable doing it. Sometimes like you when you're working on somebody, it's like, okay, this is kind of questionable, is this there for like a purpose? You're not always gonna move and shift things because
Mhm.
you know that there's lessons there
Yeah.
intuitively, you know.
And that's, well, you're bringing this, you're circling all the way back. I love this, to gifts, right? In some way, because as we are interacting with the client, we might get messages that are not meant for the client's ears, right? It's meant for our ears and our mind or whatever to instruct upon this. It's not meant to be verbalized. And so a lot of times we might be like, okay, and asking internally, is this something that is meant for the client to hear? Or for so-and-so to hear, right? For Bob to hear, or Jill or whatever. And within that, I love that every single practitioner will always go through this adjustment a little bit of an interaction with their level of trust. Because when we witness those things where we might see a solution to something and we might go, yes, I see what's going on and I can remove it and all this good stuff and the day is going to be happy, and all these things. And spirits will hold on. No. The wisdom isn't through yet. They need to feel this more. They need to go through it more, right? And so we may not hear that, no, hold on. Instead, what we might actually hear is doubt in ourselves, right? Like, oh, wow, is this real? That's how it can translate. And so the medicine in that is that we are building greater trust, because as we go, okay, there's something about the situation that feels off. What is that deeper message that's coming through right now, right? What is the client showing up for me in this moment for? And so that would be like, oh, maybe I've never communed with this type of a spirit before, and we need to work on our communication level, right? Maybe like I haven't communicated with a unicorn. Well, I have, but maybe we haven't, for whatever, in quotes. And so we just need to learn how to speak unicorn before we can go into the thing, right? And so that would be the wisdom in that. And we're learning. We're like, oh, cool, this showed up for me. Great. But on the translation aspect of it, we're respecting the no, even if it comes from our doubts, right? It doesn't mean like pushing through those doubts it's the old masculine paradigm. We don't need to do that. That's really that's
Forceful.
That's very forceful. Yeah. And that's how we get into a lot of owies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got a comment. On a show, the psychic healer was saying that most people don't see the results as having gone through a surgery. And when she tells them they have to treat it like a surgery because for the next few days, they need to take it easy. Well, yeah. When you have an emotional release, like I just worked on a client and I'm like, oh, that's a doozy. I always call my client afterward anyways, but I'm like, you're going to feel this.
Mm-hmm.
This was huge. This was huge for you. You need to take that Epsom salt bath, or at least put your feet in some hot water or something and drink a lot of water, because your body, that energy going into your body is causing a physiological change in your structure, and you're detoxing. So yeah, physically you're gonna feel it. You may not feel it. You may not feel anything.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because it's like, well, what does it look like for somebody to so to speak, instantaneously like heal a cancer? And there's plenty of evidence through workshops, through many workshops. You can read several metaphysical books. Joe Dispenza has some, Byron Katie has a couple books, and all these things where people have instantaneous healings of some form. And it's like, well, where is the wound going? It's being alchemized like instantaneously by the body. And we know that a lot of cancers or other things are really just a lot of stuck, dense energies. And so once that gets released, the body is actually having to process that in whatever way it might be. And a lot of times it comes in the form of a toxin. Like it's the same. It's a good analogy when you're detoxing from like sugars and preservatives and other things like that. They'll come out of your pores eventually, and you actually When you're detoxing, like doing a cleanse, you actually stink for a couple days. And like, you're like, why is that odor around? I've never smelled that odor. But that's literally your body alchemizing that stuff out. It's getting rid of it the best way it can. But in its previous iteration, it couldn't do that. All it had to do was use your energy to keep it held in place, because that's part of your story. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We got a bunch of stinky clients, right? Isn't that great?
I love it.
Oh my God. So that's why you tell them, like, you should probably, eat something healthy. I always ate a bacon cheeseburger.
Well, there you go. Okay. Whatever you're called to,
Right. I needed the protein, or peanut butter. I've had Reiki twice. The second time, she kept pulling and pulling stuff out, and my arms physically jerked during it. And after, I bawled like crazy. I was so exhausted.
Yeah.
Never felt that before. I can't imagine. Well, it sounds like there was some sort of cords there. So under Matthew's definition, that was a surgery.
That would have been, a lot of removal. Yeah, that kind of stuff. I mean, if you can go into psychic surgery on many different levels. We didn't get into all of that, but like you can go into the cognitive level, into the consciousness level, or and down all the way into the physical level with surgeries and stuff like that. But I didn't get into that because that's very
auric.
Yeah,
okay.
auric. You can do in a lot of different places, and when you're in, like the Virginia was describing, the jerkiness of the limbs is your body releasing. And oftentimes when we're on the table or when we were first experiencing those, you're like, why is this happening? And so part of the acceptance of it is you being okay doing whatever the heck the body's going to do on that table and not feeling embarrassed about it. So oftentimes I really enjoy getting the clients to get over being embarrassed in whatever way I can. And so I love having people, if they're going through like a heart issue, like shout about it, and like a worthiness thing, you say the opposite, and when I first tell people to do this, something like I am, amazing, or whatever it would be, a lot of times people are like, I'm amazing on the table, and I'm like, oh no. The people on the next block need to hear you. And that's what I mean. And that gets you into the receptive state to do whatever the hell is going to happen on that table.
Cut loose, man.
Yeah.
Cry. Whatever.
That's good.
I like drinking water more now. It's so helpful flushing. But drinking more water keeps my healed broken ankle extra swelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the interesting things, I don't remember the exact statistic around this, but it's like a really high number. It's like 70% or something like that of us are going around in chronic dehydrated states. And when we still function in that, and a lot of times it's because stress is so high that we're always running in overdrive. And so when your stress calms down, generally your thirstiness will go up more because your body will be more receptive to it too. But when you first start to hydrate yourself, your body thinks that it's flushing itself. And so you actually have to hydrate for like a week to get your body to retain that water. Otherwise, it's still going to flush it through you. It's really weird. But when we get to that space where you can have enough water in your system, it's better, especially for just healing and stuff. The book Hidden Messages in Water, I think it's called. I probably have it on a bookshelf up somewhere, but at any rate, it's cool because many people have probably seen this book, but they freeze water and they put different music into it and different tones or whatever vibrations. Yeah, and they freeze it and put fractals into it, and the same thing happens when we're in the different emotional states and we cry, our tears look different. And so it's interesting when we think about how powerful water is in it as an alchemical tool, because it's also taking away like the energy or the sadness or the story or whatever it is in the form of tears too. So if we don't have enough of the water and stuff, there we go.
Yes, I can never remember his name. Dr. Emoto.
Yeah. Yep. Dr. Emoto. And so you can see how this is just a beautiful representation. But if we freeze our tears, or if we were to freeze, whatever in a certain emotional state, we could see what our vibration would be in this beautiful fractal form. And so if we're depleted in water and we're stressed all the time, often that's just going to initiate those the upregulation of cortisol and other stress hormones that cause inflammation and things like that, to try and protect the body. So super cool. Yeah. Good observation.
That's a lot of sound healing stuff.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. But it's so true, because I mean, a lot of us are doing, there's hypnosis, mindset, a lot of mindset stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically you're changing that frequency internally.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're doing energy work, sound healing, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's so fun. Like once you go down the rabbit hole enough, I guess you could call it the rabbit hole enough. I really call it just another day at the office at this point,
Right.
because the old, like before we all learned all this stuff and educated ourselves on so many things. Like life was so much less like an art piece. It was so difficult, so much more difficult to go through. It felt so much more in resistance to everything. And once, like the more that I go into this and learn about all the different modalities and spirit, and just diving into spiritualism and consciousness and all of the things, excuse me, the more I realize we're basically just an awareness of consciousness that has a paintbrush, and all we're doing is trying to just, paint out here. And we have to, if we want to be good artists, we really have to fuel our paintbrush and take care of it. And that means mentally, emotionally, physically, all of that stuff, and spiritually, obviously. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really diving deep into this energy stuff, and it's like, how much the body is energy. I mean, everything's energy, and how, more so how it's all interconnected, and how that consciousness like lives on and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I love that too. As you say, the consciousness lives on and on and on and on, because there is a certain level of perception that we can interact with, and it might be a little bit more it might be very beneficial for us as a collective, is to start interacting with like archetype areas, or I would say effigies or things like that. And so we might maybe in a prayer or a meditation, just individually, we might want to go and talk to the archetype of collective compassion over the whole world, in a way, because that's an energy, right? That's moving, and it's in us, and it's in the things everywhere. And so that's a really cool way that you just brought up, to kind of interact with that and try to make an impact in the world. Yeah, as just to talk to that, or to imagine that the collective compassionate being that we all reside in is also in need of healing. And maybe there's something about that being that can be talked to, even like, maybe we're having a really hard time, and that compassion being is a little kid for you, and how could you talk to that little compassionate kid and whatnot. So anyway, it's beautiful work. I love doing that stuff. Yeah.
Oh, it's funny you bring up archetypes. I had someone do I forgot what it's called, but it was basically an archetype astrological reading.
Mm-hmm.
And They're like, well, you're kind of like a rock star and you're on stage and you want to give everybody an orgasm before they go home. And you're not going to be happy until everybody has an orgasm.
I want tickets to this concert. What's going on here? Oh, wait, we're part of that. Never mind. No, I'm adjusting my seat.
So, yeah, that's kind of who I am.
I love it.
Not literally, but figuratively.
I love that. I want tickets constantly, man. I mean,
well, hey, you're part of it. You know, you're part of this energy. You've been my co-host, my friend for the last year and a half or so, doing this What the Bleep series, and we've learned a lot. Pick me.
Oh, I love it.
We're just gonna send them energy, and they're gonna have orgasms. I think that's you know.
There we go. I mean, oh man, that's a whole bucket of worms talking to the archetypal collective energy of sexuality. That's an interesting thing. Yeah.
Huh.
That's just bringing up, if we're all talking about pleasure, that's an interesting thing to talk about, because we could see how in the world there are so many different accepted stances on what pleasure is. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, there's like, oh wow, there's a lot of different archetypes you could talk to in that space. And it's kind of interesting that when at some point along most people's journeys, they will engage in this a deepening of their own intimacy. And I mean that to say, like, into themselves they see as well, is so they actually understand what real pleasure is for them. And so a lot of people will go along the path of finding and discovering what like actual tantra means. Not the US version of tantra that's like just the Kama Sutra in the book that's fun, right? That's a lot of fun, but there's so much more to it and understanding that connection. So yeah, that's really interesting. I like that. Mm-hmm.
I've had that connection with somebody, but it wasn't, I'll write about it. And it wasn't sexual at all. So, okay.
Linda just posted something really quick that was really cool. It must be easier to talk to these archetypes when we're in our higher self.
It's like talking to our ego.
It kind of, yes.
In a way.
Yeah, in a way. There's a certain sense that this is actually kind of cool to retouch on psychic surgery in a way as well, that when we're using the mind so much to do things, and when we're traveling outside, we're becoming energy again. And so it's an interesting thing to kind of like work within those realms, to come from a space of I'm energy talking to energy, or I'm a person talking to the collective energy who are also manifested as people. And so there's sometimes this, you could call it a little bit of like a golden ego in a way. I'm kind of stretching the term on this one, but when we assume that when we're doing like meditations or things like that, a lot of times we connect to our higher self and we lose the understanding that we have a body. We just lose the understanding of it. Okay. We don't think of the body. Oftentimes we'll have these descriptions of not feeling our limbs or other things. And so we're in energy at that point, right? We're actually in energy. And so it's important to understand, if we're going to try to make an effect on the planet, yes, we can do those interactions in just the energetic field, but also we have to be courageous enough to act them out. We have to be the ones courageous enough to also act those things out when the message comes to us. Otherwise, then it's just rewounding, so to speak. Yeah. Love it. What does it say?
Depending on what you're doing. There are times that I've given little speeches to the ether, and I've started to ask, who is this talk for? And I started getting names.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I love that. I mean, there's more than one way to communicate with the unseen. Oftentimes clients will come to me and be like, I don't know if you really want me to say this because it's going to sound really weird. And
Are you
I'm all like,
serious?
I'm all like, yeah, you have not been inside my brain, or you and every other client says the exact same thing. And it's beautiful because we learn that there are so many different ways of getting and receiving messages or interacting. And so I think that's beautiful that as you're doing that type of prayer work, that you're directly connecting with beings that are wanting to communicate. That's really cool. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was trying to identify with you talking about just being energy and not being aware, having that like awareness of being in your body,
Mm-hmm.
And so I know when I do that, it's really working with that energy. You're really so focused on doing this thing with the energy that you forget you're human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you forget to create it in the 3D. You're like, oh yeah, it's up there. It's great. And then you're like, wait a minute, I don't see it in front of me. Right?
Like, bring it down here.
Bring it down. It's so I love that you just brought that up because it was like there was this time in which after The Secret came out and we all watched that and was like, oh my gosh, what we think about, we bring about. But the next step is action. And The Secret kind of left that little blip out. And that was like The Secret 2 or whatever. And so it's like the step of action that you actually have to do the thing. But it's like, if we want abundance and we expect to be the same old person, then all we're doing is actually reproducing the same old past. And so it's better to understand that if we're trying to be different, then we have to actually be different. Yeah.
Isn't there also some healing that might need to occur in that process?
Yeah.
As well?
Oh yeah. That's again where you're talking about that wisdom and that medicine coming through is what's there for me in this process. Because so if I'm working in trying to be abundant and whatever my blockage is, let's say and a lot of us can probably identify with this, where we're on the way up and then something knocks us down. We're on the way up and something knocks us down. And so we go, okay, I really want to release this thing that's stopping my abundance. And part of you actually course correcting that this pattern is to actually move through it and tackle the pattern. Because the experience that you get while going through the difficulty is the wisdom. And so as you gain that wisdom, you're actually gaining it for the collective. So we can see that, or we could view that every single person's struggles or every person's lives or journeys and experiences are part of like this collective, this way of the collective to download or get information so that we can redistribute it in different ways. And so we obviously see this through generational wisdom. So just parents teaching kids, right? And that happens because of the experiences they go through. And so in the same aspect, what wisdoms are you going through to help course correct the collective in some way, or just your immediacy, your immediate relations, to influence their ability to be abundant as well? Because you're not probably the only one dealing with this kind of issue or whatever. You're part of a whole conglomeration of people that are along the same path. And as you move through things and you talk about it and you celebrate your newness from the old part, other people are going to see you celebrating and they're going to go, oh, that's what I've been trying to do. That's the wisdom I've been looking for.
And I want some.
Exactly. I want some of that. I want some of that ice cream or those jimmies on top, whatever. I want that. And yeah. And so they're going to take the next level of that and go deeper with it probably. And they might go deeper with it, but you'll also probably get a chance to go deeper with it because we're onions, right? We're just those layers. That's why, again, when it comes down to that, why does this keep happening to me? Why do I keep getting knocked down? Well, it's because your pedestal is actually way higher than it was before. And you just don't realize that. So your fall, you might, like every single time you fall, you might be getting more frustrated or whatever it is. And that's beautiful, because that means that you've hit so many plateaus, or not plateaus, but so many different pedestals. You've gone higher and higher and higher, that the manifestation, the feeling of you falling or reiterating, is that huge frustration that's even more like, God, I was already through this, right? And so that's going to motivate you, hopefully, to dive deeper or do more course correcting or more foundational work within this. Because as we're frustrated, we're like, well, I'm apparently not getting the memo. So what's going on, right? And that might bring us back to square one, which is a beautiful place, because if you are trying to operate in a space that is light years or whatever ahead of where your perception, your being thinks you are, you need to do that. You've got to go through those things. You have to reinvent yourself. You have to believe in the unbelievable, and that's required. And so that might look like to the universe being like, well, I'm going to keep knocking you down until you get the clue that that ain't your reality, right? And then eventually you get that wisdom, and then it just completely shifts, whichever. So.
You know, I've been thinking lately, so this whole spiritual thing, we don't have like a university or a place where we keep this history of and documentation of all of this. Don't you find that interesting? Like so we can go back and go, look, this is how, like, forgive me for saying this is how stupid we were. And this is how we've grown.
Mm-hmm.
I you know what I mean? I mean, we've got books. We do have books, but we don't have like this, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I love that question, because in the ego, in the ego's sense, yeah, I can't go on the internet and start Google searching this. I can't go to the public library and pull off, all this information. It's not in the physical form yet, and because we understand that we're quantum beings, and as we understand that time is a creation that we've done so that we can experience moment to moment. We've inadvertently created a space where we have to remember the stuff that was out there. And so the only way that we can remember this is by going through time in this current iteration to our understanding. So the only way that we can create those is by actually going through those experiences and redoing them, so to speak, in this reality. And then we will know them. And so in essence, life is kind of that book. It just is really frustrating because our ego is like, but what? But I want the knowledge now, or whatever it might be.
I don't know. I feel like maybe we should have like an opportunity to put our children through like some sort of like learning this from an early age, so that we as a collective can advance.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I think that there are areas excuse me. Oh, that's gone. There are areas that we can go to and give those like expose our future generations to that. They're kind of few and far between. But the most place that we actually are seeing that is in the collective shift, just all over the planet. There are people that I talk to now that are in their teen years, and they're having the ability to fully converse with me or you or anybody on this level of energy, or these things about that during our lifetime, we've been like, oh, what is this? They came in with it. And so in essence, as we are doing our work, it is the school for them. It's a slow school, and our ego doesn't like that, right? And I would recommend that if we want to teach our kids these things, then we need to step up to the plate and really understand like how we're voting. And I don't mean to make this all political or anything, but every time we spend our money, we're creating a certain reality. Every time we choose to eat a certain food, we're creating that reality. that we choose to use a certain technology, we're creating that reality, and we're recreating it. And so, like realistically, if we wanted to shift away from energy resources that polluted the planet, we could do that. Everyone, we have the technology right now to provide like free energy, so to speak. But we were not doing it. And so that comes to the question of like, okay, how are we actually going to show up and teach the future generations if we're not willing to go and interact in our normal communities and model that behavior? It's kind of hard to ask for an institution, so to speak, to solidify this information into a context where somebody could go read it, because they're not going to want to go read that, so to speak, right? Because that's not the reality they're living. They're not going to have an impetus to do it. So in some regards, I would encourage everybody to take a look at, how we're using certain things and maybe do a little course correcting. One of the things that I did when I bought my next vehicle, and I love convertibles, but there's not a convertible that I found that's an electric vehicle. And nor is there one that gets over 40 miles to the gallon. So I'm going to bite the bullet until somebody gets that out there, and I will be one of the first people to buy that. But because I love convertibles. But yeah, how can we make those choices instead of making these choices out of just pleasure? How can we make choices that are going to enhance the world that we live in for future generations?
This kind of goes back to belief systems, and that, the collective has been educated. They've, had that generational education, through family, through society, and historically, the collective's never really healed because we're all been brainwashed a certain way to a degree, believing that we have to live this way because that's how we've lived. And we've never healed from some major things in history. And now new history or repeating patterns happening in the collective. And
I really like that you brought that up, because of course we're getting deep now into the big stuff, right? It's really cool to bring up this idea. And where do sorry, I want to take that somewhere.
You got 3 minutes now.
3 minutes to do stuff. I guess like a part that we could say to just move forward in this space is who told us where we came from? Okay. When we go on TV and we see these, like everybody just saying, this is how we live, or if we read certain news sources or other things and they're like, this is how the world is. Well, there's multiple perspectives to so many different things. And we are trained to view the world in a black and white scenario from a very early age. So if there's something that anybody can take from this episode, it would be to unlearn, like actively go to unlearn that black and white behavior. In perceptual understanding of the world. There's not just one way to do things, or there's not, a right or a wrong way to do things. We have an entire community of different ways that we view the world. And as we come together and we're able to have more conversations that are free of judgment or competition, the more that we can actually come to a cohesive understanding of what's actually in front of us. I always repeat, one of my mentors, when I was going through shaman training, Dalak Patangi, Mountain Eagle, he's a Shoshone Paiute. He talked about the wisdom of coming back to the circle and back to the heart. And that's his motto, come back to the circle, back to the heart. And it means as you gather, you're going to gather like in a group of people, and everybody is going to eventually come to a heart space of something, right? A lot of us have forgotten how to do this. And so maybe what we're doing in the next 10, 30, 50, whatever years is, as a society, is learning actually how to have conversations free of this black and white scenario of competition. Like there's an interesting way when,
or triggers.
yeah, or triggers. Yeah, like when we're when we're wanting to get something done and it requires another individual, it's really powerful to be able to understand that that individual is probably trying the best that they can. And so if we come at them in this place of like shame and guilt and things, then all we're doing is adding stress to their currently already stressed environment in their perception of whatever's happening. And so we don't know that context. So coming back to the circle, back to the heart would mean a check-in, right? Or at least understanding, oh, what's this person's capability right now? What is their ability to just be? And like a lot of the old paradigm of corporate structures was like, you know, I don't want your BS at work, and you know, you leave work at work and then you never bring it home. And that creates such a black and white person that can't express themselves, but at certain times. And so you end up being two different people, and that's not a very good existence. We understand the chronic issues that have happened because of that. We see it all over the place, like these bad industries that are just continuously like, people go into work and they have this perceptual understanding that that's the end of it. And they don't really understand expression or joy in some ways. And so we see these people everywhere where they're just like, I'm stuck in this dead end job or whatever. And that's that old paradigm. That's that competition model where there's no collaboration to come back to actually what we're doing as purpose in this space. And when we do that, every time I've come to a circle with somebody, it always comes back to thank you so much for gathering. Thank you for being here. Thank you for contributing. Thank you for allowing me or us to witness who you are. Thank you for sharing, for witnessing me and who I am and whatnot. Like this, the collective share and understanding, it builds so much empathy, and it triggers all of those cool, happy chemical releases of dopamine and serotonin and all these things. So, yeah.
I like to boil it down to that. We are sexless. We're just in meat suits. We're all energy. And if we could just see ourselves as energy, things might be a little different here.
I think so. I really like how you just put that. Meat bags or meat suits. I like this, but it's like, who told this meat bag or this meat suit that it had to have certain preferences? It had to do certain things, right? Like, who told that the thing that it has to do this? I just think that's hilarious. I love it.
If we could just communicate on an energetic level,
we'd be so different, right? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's when I think back to the past lives in Arcturus or Sirius or all these other, like when you go into past lives of different starseed forms, some of them do have very energetic understandings of the world. And so that's kind of fun. And also they don't get to experience certain things like taste. So that
sucks.
Right? Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, if you don't have a body, if you don't have a tongue, you can't taste things. So it's interesting the privileges we get being in the 3D. It's nice.
Right. Mm-hmm. Matthew, our time is up, and this has been a great conversation. We really should have recorded all of our after seminar webinar series conversations, but they were a little private, so I don't know if they were like worth sharing.
Some of them we're a little private, but that wisdom is just going to have to resurface and somehow. So
because some of those conversations were great, and so I want to thank you for being here tonight. I know we didn't really talk about what the Bleep series. Maybe we'll have to rehash it when the whole series is over. Our final what the Bleep for this series. We don't know where this is going, if it's going to continue, but the last one we do have planned is this Saturday at 9:00 Pacific Standard Time, and so we'll be back with our meat suits and smiles.
Yes. What the Bleep are spiritual practices. The ending to like bring everything home and kind of allow us to understand where we can go from here on out. And yeah, there will be more. I've already felt that. who knows exactly what form it'll be in, but I feel like there's a lot more coming.
There's stuff, yeah, you know, we both have said this for months. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we're in the Pacific Standard Time Zone.
Oh, yes.
We're in Reno, Nevada.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I got other stuff down here. Stars, ancient aliens. Anyways.
Oh, we had a lot to talk about. We didn't even get to. We'll have to do this again.
Well, yeah, we will. Maybe I love doing discussions like this. And so thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I love coming on your show and talking and just having a good time. It feels like there's a different level of connection that the world gets and that we get. And I like that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, viewers. Thank you, listeners. I hope you enjoy the show. And good night.
Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.